But the person that you're going to hear from next is an activist. He's a political activist and a freedom advocate. His name is Joel Hirst. And Joel is the co-founder of the Cordova Group International Consulting Firm in Northern Virginia. He is also a fellow in human freedom at the George W. Bush Institute. He has been a recipient of the prestigious International Affairs Fellowship at the Council of Foreign Relations. And as a visiting fellow at the Council, he researched the Cuba-Venezuela-sponsored Bolivarian Alliance of the Americas, and he wrote the first English language book on the subject titled Alba, Inside Venezuela's Bolivarian Alliance. He's worked for 6 years with the USA's Office of Transition Initiatives. For 2 years, this was in Uganda, focusing on post-conflict transition in the Lord's Resistance Army affected areas and receiving the Field Team of the Year award. In Venezuela, he worked for 4 years on democracy promotion, elections, civil society, and human rights, receiving a Superior Honor Award for work on the 2007 constitutional referendum. And prior to this, Joel Hirst worked as a humanitarian relief worker with World Vision in countries such as Pakistan, Venezuela, Kosovo, Congo, Chad, Honduras, and Nicaragua. He has written a number of chapters for books by the International Republican Institute and the University of Miami on Latin American policy, as well as a number of articles and periodicals, probably too numerous to mention, but many that you would quickly recognize. And he is also the author of the upcoming novel, The Lieutenant of San Porfirio. He has his master's degree in international development from Brandeis University, a bachelor's degree in international ministries from Moody. He grew up in Argentina, Costa Rica, and Venezuela, where his parents were Baptist missionaries. If there is a fellow who has got his mind on international affairs and wanting to make a difference, and you gave an Olympic medal for that, perhaps Joel would be a candidate. I'm still trying to figure out what the Bolivarian Alliance is all about, but let's welcome him and give him a greeting. He's our keynote speaker tonight, Joel Hirst.
The Bolivarian Alliance, you're going to have to go to Amazon and buy my book. Friends and honored guests, it is a great pleasure for me to address you here today. I'd like to recognize here Wayne Kramer and thank Andean for the opportunity to come and share this special event with you, as well as Pastor Carey for opening your beautiful church to us and for having a great lunch. It's been a pleasure to meet all of you. The truth is, I know the Andean region and the people well. Having grown up in Argentina, in the Andes, I got my first look at Venezuela's pristine Caribbean coast as a teenager. Arriving only a month before the infamous Caracazo, I was there through the instability and the attempted cruise in 1992. I was there again, working with the residents and survivors of the Vargas mudslides, and again, working with civil society groups in the last half of the first decade of the second millennium. My wife is Venezuelan. My mother-in-law lives in Maracay, and I count many Venezuelans among my dearest friends. The trials and travails of the Venezuelan people I hold at the very center of my being. It's for this reason that I jumped at the opportunity to come and share this event with you, and to help what I think is the most noble of causes, that modest act of reaching out an uncoerced hand to find somebody else, and in the process find ourselves, through the simple act of Christian charity. There are several reasons why this statement and the acts which it describes are radically important. First, of course, is the nature of charity. The dictionary defines charity as actions or donations to aid the poor, the ill, or the helpless. It is not, however, simply an act of transfer of wealth from the wealthy to the less well-off. Charity does not have as its goal the efficiency of redistribution. In point of fact, I would say charity is less about the money than anything else. To be sure, money is important. The United States is the wealthiest country the world has ever known. It's for this reason that we're holding this fundraiser Committed people like Wayne, like Carrie, and like all of you today know that we as Americans have more than enough material goods. That we in fact have plenty to go around. We have been blessed by God, a blessing which has come as a result of hard work, integrity, faith, sacrifice, commitment, and generosity. The United States is in fact the most generous country in the world. Recent figures place the value of American charity at, both financial and in time served, at well over $400 billion a year. Universities like Moody Bible Institute, from where I graduated, not only thrive on this charity, but send thousands upon thousands of missionaries and pastors into careers dependent upon this charity. The act of giving is part of the fiber of America. Charity, however, does not have only the beneficiary in its sights. It is not a one-sided act, but in fact works the other way as well. The act of charity humanizes both the giver and the receiver. Mother Teresa once said, "We think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, and homeless. The poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is the greatest poverty. We must start in our own homes to remedy this kind of poverty." Mother Teresa rightly knew true poverty is not about money, and true charity is not about its transfer. Poverty is in fact a condition that affects the whole man, and it is found everywhere. In truth, true poverty is not only or even most often found overseas. I'm not being flippant or facile here when I state that some of the greatest poverty I've seen in my life I found in my time back here in the United States. You see, I live in Washington, D.C. Well, we all know what that's like. The center of the political universe of this grand nation. To be sure, I also work in politics and policy, so perhaps I am at the center of the maelstrom. But I found myself deeply disappointed by many of the comments, statements, and attitudes of my fellow Americans. I find in the anger and the vitriol of the political discourse of our country a deep poverty. A poverty that stems from profound ignorance, and one that is threatening the bedrock of American charity. Martin Luther King once said, "We are prone to judge success by the index of our salaries or the size of our automobiles, rather than by the quality of our service and the relationship to humanity." I think the ignorance that we are seeing in the U.S. these days comes exactly from this. The ongoing ridiculous and dangerous discussion that relegates the conversation of American prosperity, charity, and relationship to each other and to the world to a simple tally sheet of material possessions, of who should possess material goods and who has the right to take them away, and for what reason. What areas do we have the right to occupy? Which programs may be forced upon us, and what is the accepted response? An erroneously defined social justice, reeking of covetousness, breeds resentment. And in doing this, we divide rich and poor into opposing camps, and then make them enemies, thereby destroying the very foundation of American charity. This is coincidentally the same political discussion that Venezuela continues to have, albeit in a much more advanced state. These discussions and dichotomies, and the call to conflict between the rich and the poor, keep us from seeing the symbiotic and Christian nature of human charity in a God-fearing society. Because, realistically, and let's be honest, most times those of us who are more fortunate receive more from our charity than we ever give back. When we work with those less fortunate, we ennoble our condition as we make common cause with those who have fought throughout the generations past against poverty, misery, and death. We also make real relationships, not ones brought about by always agreeing, or by convenience, or even by shared culture or geography, but instead through the very human act of seeking out the spark in each other's lives and fanning that fire until it burns white hot. In his short time on earth, Jesus talked a great deal about the poor, but always for the express purpose of building the church. He was not, as some insist, encouraging redistribution, confrontation, and class warfare, but instead the communion of shared charity. In Jesus' the poor and the rich were treated the same and were the same. This brings us to the next important point of American charity. It must be uncoerced. Christ understood that coercion never brought about true conversion. A recent blogger put it best: when Jesus spoke about loving one another, there isn't the slightest indication that he was defining love as making sure others are charitable. He was calling each heart to act for itself in love toward others. Any external compulsion to act charitably would not be love, but coercion and ending fear. There is an important reason for this. For those forced to give, be it of their wealth, of opening their house to others, or volunteering their time, the individual act of personal sacrifice is transformed into just another obligation. It becomes a tax. And the humanizing joy received as the counterpart to an act of generosity becomes instead the resentment at being forced to do something. For those on the receiving end, generosity is morphed from the kind hand of a good Samaritan to becoming instead of right. The individual contact that is the glue of society is lost, and the social contract is broken. Gratitude is replaced with scorn, personal responsibility with entitlement. The result is envy, resentment, hatred, and eventually class warfare. And what is now taxed replaces trust in God, which must be the central act of all Christian charity. The second issue that makes a robust charitable community important is that Christian charity serves in its own way as a check and balance on overactive, usually godless government. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's, was Jesus' message, clearly differentiating between the roles of the two. Unfortunately, as we have seen too often in the world and at home, activist governments attempting to socially engineer their societies do so by using people's poverty against them. They create programs funded at the point of a gun to bind the poor and the rich to the government through these charities termed entitlements, which in turn are managed by a string of anonymous bureaucrats. Even worse, they then use these entitlements to return a favor to an interest group or demand that people of faith go against their most sacred principles in response to a partisan agenda or a campaign promise. Instead of a free act of a free man finding and funding the issue that we most believe in, we are forced to give our hard-earned money and time to that which we don't care about, or worse, that we believe actually harms our society. Finally, church-based charity counters the entire toxic argument of sustainability, budgetary progress. Charity is not meant to be sustainable, because sustainability reduces faith, commitment, and individual sacrifice. Charity is instead a helping hand to those most in need, in their time of most need. This is true whether it is for the survivors of an earthquake abroad in a foreign land, or a family at home who loses a job and is having difficulty paying their mortgage. The Lord's Prayer says, "Give us this day our daily bread." We are entreated to trust the Lord. Budgetary sustainability brought about by the morphing of charity to entitlements is of course more comfortable. But who then do we trust? Uncle Sam? He may not have the church's or the poor's best interests at heart. No, the act of helping people through these difficult moments is an act of personal sacrifice for both those being helped and for those helping. It must be motivated by the humanizing emotion of empathy and compassion. Because of this, charity must be managed by believers, not bureaucrats. It must thrive on donations made by people of faith who know that the Lord will provide if only we look to Him. Why do I bring this up right now at this moment? Because frankly, I'm worried about American Christian charity. The aforementioned angry rhetoric and policies emanating from Washington may be doing irreversible harm to our community of charity. As this happens, it reduces our ability to work through groups like Andean, faith-based initiatives upon which so many, both in America and the Andes, depend. Charities that show the love of God to the least of these. In his inaugural address, President George H.W. Bush said, "I have spoken 1,000 points of light of all the community organizations that are spread like stars throughout this nation, doing good. We will work hand in hand, encouraging, sometimes leading, sometimes being led and rewarded. We will work on this in the White House, in the cabinet agencies. I will go to the people and the programs that are the brighter points of light. And I will ask every member He was talking about the American journey. Here, people come together voluntarily to stitch the richest fabric of any society that has ever existed. Churches, neighborhood committees, think tanks, and NGOs all work not to control each other, but to improve the quality of our democracy and to deepen our faith. This is what has sustained America's place in the world. Citizens coming together voluntarily to do good. Not coming together in violent acts of occupation or to demand something that is not theirs, but instead to give back freely from that which they worked so hard to achieve. You see, President Bush was comfortable with the American narrative and content to step back and fan the flames that light up our national landscape. Flames like Andean. He was a wise leader. This should not be taken for granted, for it's not always the case. Distrust often seeps into the debate by leaders who do not believe in America or trust the Lord, thinking primarily of the evils of society, and yes, there are many. They want to replace the individual pinpricks of life with a blanketing federal bureaucracy. Do-gooders are replaced with an army of unthinking bureaucrats, which has the unintended consequence of extinguishing the individual lights that illuminate us, and the fabric of faith in America starts to shred. For all these reasons, when the function of human charity is devolved to communities of faith, it frees the act of caring for others from the murky and turbulent waters of partisan politics and empty pity, humanizing both ends of the relationship. It wrests from the government another funding stream for their use on a partisan political project and the creation of bureaucracies to perpetuate these projects, and it allows the individual acts of compassion to flourish. The Christian can then continue to be salt and light of the world, as is said by the Bible. But here's the rub. This will only continue to be the case if we defend it with courage and conviction. Freedom is not a natural state. Laissez-faire compassion is under sustained assault, perhaps like no other time in history. But there is an answer. Like everything else in our society, our freedoms are only defended through their use. For this reason, as we come together today to celebrate the excellent work that Andean Aid in Venezuela does in Venezuela and Colombia, I would entreat you all to look to your faith. Understanding that it is only in acts of Christian charity that we can preserve our country and better our world, I ask you to dig deeply and give with courage. Because if we advocate the role of the church in human charity, who else can we look to illuminate our world?